He had no idea that an ordinary day of cleaning out an old house would end with police involvement, a missing artifact, and a deal worth $10,000 because that day he had simply agreed to help prepare the house for sale and expected to leave by evening with nothing but dust on his clothes. And when he climbed up to the attic, a place no one had entered for years, he saw wooden beams, cobwebs, and corners piled high with old boxes, began carrying out obvious trash, and was already about to head back down when, in the farthest corner, he noticed a heavy wooden chest without a lock, pushed almost flush against the wall, and at first he thought it would contain old books or tools. But when he lifted the lid, he saw a wide, dark leather belt inside, thick, worn at the edges, with strange, hand-stitched seams that immediately stood out. And as he examined the belt, he pressed on the inner side and unexpectedly felt a hidden pocket, carefully sewn so it couldn't be noticed from the outside. And when he cautiously pulled an object from it, his heart involuntarily began to race because in his hands was a small curved dagger with a darkened blade, a fine pattern running through the steel, and a heavy hilt that fit perfectly into his palm. And although he knew nothing about weapons or antiques, it was obvious that this was not a cheap item or a souvenir from a shop. He slowly turned the blade toward the light, noticed how the pattern on the metal seemed to come alive at a certain angle, tried to find any markings or inscriptions, but couldn't make sense of them, and questions immediately started spinning in his head about where it came from, who it belonged to, and what he was supposed to do with it, because simply throwing it away or putting it back was no longer an option. So he pulled out his phone and began recording a video, carefully showing the chest, the belt, the hidden pocket, and the dagger itself, commenting on every movement as if he already sensed that this footage might matter one day. Then took several photos, carefully placed the blade back inside, closed the chest, and went downstairs with a feeling of anxious excitement, realizing that he had found not just an old object, but something that could bring either serious trouble or a lot of money. And as he walked through the house, the thought that he had held something chajoy, valuable, and clearly hidden on purpose never left his mind for a single second. The next day, the guy took the belt and the dagger out again, this time laying them out on the table and examining them slowly in full daylight, turning the leather over in his hands, tracing the seams with his fingers, and trying to understand why the hidden pocket had been sewn so carefully. And the more he looked, the clearer it became that he was completely out of his depth. So he decided to take the most obvious step and posted several photos and a short video clip in a closed collectors community, adding a deliberately neutral description without giving away where or how the item was found. And within an hour, messages began to appear, first cautious and polite, then increasingly confident, almost dismissive, and nearly all of them repeated the same ideas. The piece was interesting, but nothing special, fairly common on the market, more decorative than valuable. And what unsettled him was not the content itself, but how similar the wording was, as if people were echoing one another. Then a man wrote who introduced himself as a specialist in Eastern bladed weapons. His messages were longer and more detailed. He commented on the curvature of the blade, pointed out areas of wear on the leather, spoke about it being a late period piece, and insisted that the belt and dagger were not an original set, but assembled from different parts. And after building that argument step by step, he offered $800, calling it a fair, realistic price without illusions, while repeatedly pushing for a quick meeting and explaining the urgency by saying that items like this either sell fast or turn out to be worthless later. The guy hesitated, reread the messages several times, but the amount sounded reasonable for something he had found by accident, and the confident, almost instructional tone of the man slowly dulled his doubts. They agreed to meet in a public place, and during the meeting the man barely spoke, carefully inspecting the belt, removing the dagger, weighing it in his hand, asking short, pointed questions, and then casually mentioning that for a final assessment he needed to check the metal structure and the age of the leather, suggesting that He take the set for just a couple of hours, and although a quiet sense of discomfort settled in the guy's stomach, he reminded himself that he had recorded the discovery, saved all the messages, and even filmed parts of the meeting. So, suppressing his hesitation and telling himself this was normal procedure, he handed the belt and dagger over, unaware that this small decision was about to pull him into a much bigger problem. At first, nothing seemed wrong because a couple of hours passed and the guy told himself that the man was probably just busy with the inspection, maybe delayed by traffic or another meeting, and he tried not to overthink it. But when evening came and no message arrived, he checked his phone again, reread the chat line by line, and noticed that the last message he had sent had not been read, which sparked a faint sense of unease that refused to go away. And by the next morning, that unease had turned into real anxiety when he realized the phone number now went straight to voicemail. The profile in the collectors group had vanished entirely, and the messages no longer showed any sign of activity. And at that moment, it fully sank in that the belt and dagger were gone, not delayed, not being evaluated, but taken. He replayed the meeting in his head again and again, remembered how calm the man had been, how confidently he had spoken, how naturally he had taken possession of the set, and the realization that all of it had been part of a setup made his stomach tighten. He spent hours searching the internet for the man's name, checking similar cases, refreshing the collectors group, sending messages to people who had commented earlier, hoping someone would respond or recognize the situation. But no one did, and as the silence stretched on, the weight of what had happened pressed down harder until finally he opened the folder on his phone where the videos were stored and carefully watched every clip he had recorded. The moment he opened the chest in the attic, the close-ups of the leather belt and the hidden pocket, the dagger resting in his palm, the man's face during the meeting, his voice, his gestures, the exact place where they stood. And for the first time since the disappearance, he felt a small but real sense of control return because the evidence was there, complete and clear, yet still unsure of what to do next and aware that acting alone could make things worse. He drove across town to his grandfather's house, sat down at the kitchen table without saying much, and silently played the videos one by one. And as his grandfather watched, his expression slowly shifted from curiosity to focus and then to concern. And by the time the last video ended and the screen went dark, it was obvious to both of them that this was no longer just about a bad deal or a naive mistake, but about a deliberate deception that would require a serious response. The next morning, they went together to the police station, and although the guy expected skepticism or indifference, the tone of the conversation changed almost immediately once the videos were played, because the footage clearly showed the discovery, the condition of the belt and dagger, the hidden pocket, and most importantly, the face and voice of the man who had taken the set. And the officers began asking precise questions, noting timestamps, locations, and details from the messages. And within an hour, a formal report was filed, after which things started moving faster than the guy had imagined. Cameras near the meeting location were checked. The phone number was traced, and it turned out that the man had used similar tactics before, approaching inexperienced sellers, building trust, and disappearing with valuable items under the guise of expert evaluation. And when officers contacted him, his tone changed completely. He claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that the item was a replica, that he had intended to return it, but pressure mounted as inconsistencies piled up. And by the time they located him in person, the belt and dagger were already in his possession, carefully wrapped and hidden. The items were seized and returned as evidence, and when the guy finally held the belt again, he felt a mix of relief and anger, realizing how close he had come to losing it permanently. But the situation did not end there, because once the item was officially documented, an independent expert was brought in to examine it, confirming that the belt and dagger formed an original set and that their age and craftsmanship made them far more valuable than initially claimed. And as the paperwork was completed and the case moved forward, The guy understood that what had started as a simple attempt to sell a strange find had turned into a lesson about trust, preparation, and the importance of not facing situations like this alone. After the case was closed and the belt and dagger were officially returned, the guy no longer rushed or trusted random messages online, instead following his grandfather's advice and reaching out through verified contacts, which led him to a well-established collector who insisted on a proper in-person evaluation with full documentation. And this time everything felt different from the start. The examination was slow and methodical. The leather was tested, the stitching analyzed, the steel examined under proper light, and the expert explained each detail without dismissing questions or applying pressure, confirming that the belt and curved dagger were an original Eastern set from the late 19th century, likely preserved intentionally due to its value. And after several days, the collector made a clear, transparent offer, which the guy carefully considered before agreeing. And the transaction was completed legally with receipts and authentication, resulting in a final sale price of $10,300, a number that still felt unreal when he saw it written down. And as he left the meeting, the weight of the entire experience finally settled in. Not just the money, but the realization of how easily things could have gone differently if he hadn't recorded the discovery, saved the messages, and turned to someone more experienced when something felt wrong. And later that evening, sitting quietly at home, he thought back to the attic, the chest, the hidden pocket, and the moment he had decided to press record, understanding that this single choice had shaped everything that followed, turning a potential loss into a hard-earned outcome and a lesson he would carry with him long after the money was spent. An interesting story, isn't it? What do you think about it?